How good is today's film, you might ask? Well, if you were given a survey about it, the category to check off would be always. Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, I got to say, man, when I saw this film at Sundance 2020 with a packed house, it just blew us all away because it was such an immersive performance, such an immersive experience. It's just a beautiful film. I'm, of course, talking about Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. And today's guest is writer-director Eliza Hittman. And I'm really glad we were able to finally have a chat about this one because I just love it. So if you haven't seen it, seek it out. Go find it. It's a great film. And as you know, the first half of every episode is spoiler free, so you can listen to what we have to say for a while before we get into the spoilers. But there are so many levels here, and something Eliza was really good at doing was just putting in subtext and putting in character feelings and emotions that were not found through dialogue. She did it through just simple little moments, and she did it really, really well. So, Eliza was really forthcoming about her creative process and what went into it. And I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We recently published issue 42. You could find us on a desktop or laptop. That's the way to read us, or via our iPad app. And look, if you've never read us before, you could read our free issue. It's sitting there waiting for you. We're one of the only magazines in the world that publishes screenplays in their entirety, accompanied by interviews. And we interview storytellers, so writers, directors, actors, showrunners, playwrights, novelists, comic book artists. There's so many different storytellers that we have in every issue of Backstory that we are just brimming with them. And I really hope that you check it out. And look, if you decide that you want to become a subscriber, remember, you could save $5 off a subscription by using code word SAVE5 over at backstory.net. And your credentials there will also work in our iPad app as well. But you can only use that at backstory.net for your subscription, and then you could sign into your iPad. But look, it really means a lot to me to have my podcast subscribers consider subscribing to my passion project. So thanks so much for considering. And by the way, folks, during the pandemic, we are putting videos of these Zoomcasts over at the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. So, of course, you can still hear the podcast in iTunes and Spotify, but just wanted you to know you could watch these interviews as well. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with writer-director Eliza Hittman about her latest film, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. Okay, Eliza, how are you doing today? It's good to see you.
Nice to see you too. I'm okay. Thank you.
Good. So I just want you to know, I was in the theater at Sundance when your film played.
Amazing.
And it was just so incredible. And I absolutely loved it. Have been talking it up ever since because you just did a fantastic job. And we're going to get to it in a few minutes, but I want to give people a sense of who you are and, where you come from. So screenwriting, was writing something you studied? Did you go to school for writing and directing?
Eventually I did. I would say later in life, I started out working in new play development in the theater world. And I never thought of myself as a writer. I had never written a play before, even though I was interested in directing, and I was sitting behind a desk, like reading stacks of plays and writing coverage and my feelings about them. And I would say that I learned a lot from that experience in terms of like the kinds of stories I responded to, the style of writing that engaged me. And it was an education in and of itself, I would say.
I've interviewed, screenwriters who started as assistants reading scripts, and, they've compared it to kind of getting that sense of the code behind the matrix, right? In which you're reading so many, you're kind of seeing story structure, you're seeing character beats, you're kind of almost seeing them broadcast. And it's sometimes like, when somebody could surprise you, that's the script that goes to the top of the stack. What were some of the patterns you noticed, both good and bad, by reading so many scripts?
Well, because it's theater, there are no rules in the same way that, a screenplay adheres to a certain format. And I think that I responded to plays that were overtly provocative, that were, dealt with themes around identity. And were very direct in their approach. I didn't like plays, that were all about like language and, linguistics and wordplay. I liked and responded to work, that had, an edge to it.
Do you think that's a common pratfall for playwrights sometimes, to get a little too poetic with the language, and it brings the viewer and the reader out of it because it's not
I
realistic?
don't know anymore because it's been so long. But I went from there, to directing. I was interested in directing theater. And then I became interested in film in my late 20s. And I went to CalArts to study film.
Okay.
So it was there. I didn't really start writing until my late 20s.
And so, I'm out here in Los Angeles. So tell us about your CalArts experience. What was the most eye-opening thing that you learned about storytelling? Because that's where you started writing.
CalArts is a unique school. It was built far from the industry for a reason. So you go to CalArts and you're not learning about storytelling in a way, in the way that we talk about it. And I would say, like, because CalArts is so rooted in experimentation, that it's quite critical of, of kind of formalistic approach to screenwriting and to filmmaking. So in a way, it was a hard place because there, are a lot of things in conventional filmmaking that they frown upon. And when you're starting out, you have to shed a lot of ingrained conventions that exist in your memory and just from your everyday movie watching.
Do you remember one of the things that you really wanted to do that you realized you had to shed?
It's tricky. I think I had to shed everything.
Okay.
Yeah. I think like one really memorable and important moment for me in my first year at CalArts, I took a class with an essay filmmaker named Leanne Schmidt, who is a student of a really incredible artist, and she's an incredible artist too, named James Benning. And there's a lot of emphasis on landscapes. And I had to go out and just document a landscape and then write 3 stories, ideas that could emerge from this space. And that was like a moment for me, because I didn't think of myself as like somebody with like an imagination to tell and to write films and to tell stories.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that, because that's a great writing exercise, to be honest. For any writer, and it's interesting. It sparks something. I've interviewed Christopher McQuarrie multiple times. The Oscar-winning writer of Usual Suspects, but also lately the Mission Impossible series. And on Mission Impossible, the thing that he says is one of the most important parts of his process is his location scout, because he feels he can't write many of his scenes until he's actually inhabiting the location, which is interesting because, yeah.
Me too.
Interesting.
Me too. If I can't see it and walk through it, I don't have an imagination for it.
Interesting. Huh. That's fascinating. Well, so I know you made short films, and we're going to get to today's film in a second, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention your feature debut, It Felt Like Love. What was your biggest lesson on that? I know there's probably a million lessons and we could do a whole episode, but what was something that was a real eye-opening moment on that experience for you?
An eye-opening moment. I think like that film was so important to me because I wrote a script, I sent it to the Sundance labs and they were like, oh, this is, too provocative for the sake of being provocative. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have a manager. And I was like, fuck it. Like, I'm going to make this, it's got like 4 kids in the middle of the summer hanging out on the beach. I wrote it around all locations I had access to. The DP, who's incredible, named Sean Porter, he had the camera, and we hired a sound person.
That's awesome.
And I was essentially invisible to the industry. And I found the right collaborators, and we made something with nothing. And that's how I started my career.
That's awesome. What was your budget?
The budget was like $25,000 to shoot it. I had a Fractured Atlas donation page and a relative who worked at Google, and I got like a Google matching grant. So I raised $6,000 and then had $12,000 and, donations. And then once the film was finished, we found and we screened it for like potential investors. They gave us money for post. So there were about, 3 or 4 financiers who each put in under $25,000.
That's incredible. And that's what you have to do. It's that old classic story of, making a film on a credit card. So, not taking no for an answer. It's not easy to get the capital and to be able to do it. But if you're determined and you keep looking in every corner, that's a fascinating story. I was also at one of your first screenings for Beach Rats at Sundance, which I dug as well. And God, I really missed being in person at Sundance this year. But what was your biggest lesson on Beach Rats? Again, teens at the beach.
Teens on the beach.
And finally, you are at the Sundance Institute for that one, right? So
yeah, they welcomed me in the next time and wanted to find a way to be supportive. And I think that the material was, also provocative and challenging, but they got behind me. I don't know, there was just more people behind me. There were more stakes on Beach Rats, even though it was a movie made for under $1 million. It felt like very high stakes because there were like real people involved this time. And it was, I don't know, I don't know if there were any like major lessons learned, but it was in a way stepping up onto a bigger canvas. I had, a new DP from, France named Hélène Levart, and we began a collaboration, and I was working with Cinereach, which is an incredible organization that supports artists, and sometimes they finance films. So in a way, it was still far from the industry because we were working in this different model with a nonprofit.
I think the last thing to mention before we get to today's film is your last evolution, as a filmmaker, was you directed television. 13 Reasons Why and High Maintenance. What was your biggest lesson from television? Because, for some people it's an easy transition. For others, it takes a little bit of adjusting.
Well, High Maintenance, they were friends. We had known each other because we were all in the 25 New Faces at the same year. So that was like an organic progression because they had admired my work. I had admired their work. We were sharing and trading crew. So to step into that TV space with them felt very different than stepping onto a studio, for 13 Reasons Why. It's a very different experience making a feature and directing television, because when you make a feature, you're shooting and cutting to your vision. But with television, other people want options and have ideas about what they want to work with in the edit. So you're essentially, you have your vision, but you're also gathering all these materials so that they have what they want to be happy.
All right. Well, so I know this is the most talked out question you probably had. So what gave you the idea for Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always? And then we'll get into more interesting questions, I promise.
Yeah. It's a long story. The short version is I was editing my first film. It felt like love. And I was reading a newspaper, and this woman died in Ireland, and it made all the global headlines, named Savita Halappanavar. And she was pregnant and had blood poisoning. And because Ireland had an Eighth Amendment that made abortion illegal, and the life of the fetus had equal value to the life of the mother, they wouldn't give her an abortion, and she died. And I started reading about abortion tourism, which is this insensitive term that describes the long, distressing journey that women take in secrecy, from one country to another country to get an abortion. And the light bulb went on and said, I haven't seen that journey.
That's a great way to look at it. When you sit down to write, I want to talk about your creative habit for a second. Mm-hmm. How important is outlining to your process?
I'm somebody who likes to be in the world. Like, I knew the bare bones of the film I was going to make. I knew that it was about a girl in rural Pennsylvania spending 48 hours in New York navigating a crisis and a city she had never been to. I had questions about how to approach that, structurally. Did we start in New York, reveal where she'd come from, start in Pennsylvania? And in order to answer all of those questions, I decided the best way to do that, instead of writing outlines and treatments, was to take the journey. So I went to some small towns in Pennsylvania because I needed to see it, like we discussed. And I needed to understand her world. Like, where would she work? Where would she live? What would her mother do? What would her high school be like? And gather all that information for myself and take the bus to New York. And I took the bus, and while I was on the bus, I stopped in like a random parking lot in New Jersey because we had to switch buses, but nobody gave us any instructions. And I watched
Which happens in the movie, exactly.
Which happens in the movie. I made videos of the landscape on my phone of who was on the bus. I documented the journey. And then I arrived in Port Authority, and it's like, what's that like? What's the light like in the tunnel? Where would they go? Where would they eat? And just, I don't know, it's a little like playing out an adventure, choose your own adventure. Like, you have these ideas about the story. And then I go home and I sit down and I write.
And at that point, did you break it into an outline, or did you have it more of a treatment, or just ideas in notebooks?
I wish I could say I was more organized. I'm not like an organized, like, outline treatment writer.
Okay, there's no one way to do it, so that's great to know.
I had video sketches. I had, pictures of supermarkets. I had these materials.
That's great. Well, so when you sit down to write, do you give yourself a certain amount of hours that you want to write each day, or do you try and hit a certain page count each day?
No. The first thing I tried to do was to find the voice of the character, because I think a lot of times people can have ideas for movies, but the characters aren't deeply felt. And so for me, I just write pages of the character, and I wrote pages and pages of this girl kind of wandering around this town with a secret and in pain, and we don't know why, until she goes to this little center. And a lot of those scenes didn't end up in the film, and some of them did, but it was a way to unlock and connect.
I got to ask this just even on a personal level, because this is such a plague in my life. When you have all these notes, right? Mm-hmm. And like, I've talked to writers, they have notebooks, they'll have, stuff on their walls sometimes, as you said, video sketches, all these materials. I'm such an unorganized guy sometimes when it comes to some of that stuff, even though we somehow are able to put out a magazine. So I'm organized on some levels. How do you collate that to boil it down? Because one of the problems that, like, I've seen and talked to other writers about sometimes is when you have an abundance of material, right? Because you could get lost in research, you could get lost in character studies, you could get lost in notebooks. Then when you have to go back and collate that into something of like, yeah, I picked that. Do you have like a certain time period where you're like, you know what? I've taken enough notes. I've done enough, character sketches and character write-ups. I'm now going to start writing. Do you have like a day like that when you collate?
I guess for me, it feels more like a balancing act, because I wanted it to be a character study. I wanted it to be a procedural drama. I wanted it to be a road movie. I wanted it to be a story about sisterhood and female solidarity. And, I think I did so much research in terms of going to Planned Parenthoods and touring facilities and hearing from social workers and going through, like the experience that a minor would have. But ultimately, I had to filter it all through the character because you can't put everything in. And it is this delicate balancing act. And yeah, I mean, I think I don't, I just have an intuitive way of kind of weeding through all of the ideas. But there are things that get cut. And I think that screenwriting, like editing, is this reductive process. And you have to know, what to get rid of.
How long did it take you to do your first draft?
I guess probably I have a parallel career as a film professor, so I don't sit and write for 14 weeks, or whatever, like, you're commissioned to do. It ends up being like an 8-month process.
Okay. Wait, where do you teach?
I teach at Pratt Institute.
Okay. What kind of classes do you teach there?
I teach like a senior thesis project class and directing classes and screenwriting classes.
That's great. What do you do when you get writer's block? How do you battle it if you get it?
With Never Rarely, I would go back and call someone at Planned Parenthood and have another conversation. And, I think it's not so much that I get writer's block because I always have a sense of, like, while I'm writing, there's this dark event in the script and I can feel it and it's like pulling me towards it. And I never have like writer's block, but because I'm always simultaneously promoting a movie while I'm writing a movie, that can affect my sense of confidence and worth.
Interesting. How long was your first draft?
They're never very long. They're like 85-page scripts.
Oh, okay. That's good that it's lean. Well, so then how many rewrites would you say you went through as you started looking for funding?
I don't know exactly. I like finishing the script and then sending it out and then beginning to build the world. And like, as I cast and as I like location scout and all of those things more in a more concrete way, like we're making this movie, then I begin to sort of rewrite and like incorporate notes. And I don't know, it's not such a like kind of clean process with like, a certain number of days or months or weeks writing and a certain number of revisions. Like I'm revising until I shoot.
That's great. I mean, there's no one way to do it. That's the beautiful thing about it. Well, so tell me this, a lot of writers, when they have a script that they're getting ready to shoot or that they're getting ready to get out there, they sometimes go to an intimate group of friends for notes. And notes could be a confusing stage in the process because you're going to get differing opinions. You've got to stay true to your own voice. But at the same time, if you're, seeing the same criticism, complaint, or question mark from people, it means that there might be something for you to work on. So how do you handle your notes process?
I think notes are good, and I think that, I have like a select group of people whose opinions I trust, who I feel are supportive and critical. And I think with Never Rarely, we did a reading where I brought in a couple of students to read the script, and my producers were there and a few friends. I think it's good to hear it read, in a room with people and have an experience with it and then get notes. And that was useful. But I think, you have to align yourself with collaborators who understand the sensibility. Sorry. I don't know. Like, I don't want somebody to read the script who I don't think is going to get it and give me notes that aren't going to be helpful or be like, or try and be too harsh. Like, I want people who understand my voice.
That makes sense. That's a good way to do it. So what was it like to go out and try and get a budget to make this film happen?
Hard. Nobody wants to make, let's be honest, nobody wants to make a movie about how hard it is to get a legal abortion in America. The gatekeepers are all men. Sorry, but there's, an inherent misogyny to the world we live in. That's what the movie's about. And, there's a lot of people who, didn't think it was commercial. It's not. I wasn't pretending. Not
every movie has to be commercial. I mean, like,
no, I know. You know what I mean?
Didn't need $100 million budget. It's just so funny.
No, I had two very dedicated producers, Adela Romansky and Sarah Murphy, who raised the bar on the budget. And they were like, you should have this much money to make this movie. That's why we're going to produce it, is because we feel you deserve this.
And what was that bar? Are you able to say?
I don't know if I'm allowed to say. It's not much.
Okay. Are we talking under $1 million, over $1 million? Over
$1 million, but, not nearly close to what most men, get for their first features.
Gotcha. And
so it was hard, but we found a group of financiers who are all amazing to invest in the film. And I feel really fortunate that they are now sort of part of my career.
What was your schedule?
27 days.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's actually a solid amount of time. Some Sundance movies, Sundance movies are under 20. So I'm actually really glad to hear that you got a little more time.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
There was a lot of moving. I would say like one of my fatal flaws as a writer is that I tend to write too many scenes that are short in too many locations.
Yes.
So there's way too much moving around, and it's something I'm actively trying to fix in the next screenplay.
Do you think it needs to be fixed though? I mean, I like the movie. So and something about moving around adds variety to the images that you're seeing. Is it a flaw?
It's hard. It's hard on the crew. It's hard, it's hard to find, it's hard to sort of manage for a locations person. It's a lot. Mm-hmm.
What was your last question before we get into the spoilers? What was your experience like selling it at Sundance?
I didn't sell it at Sundance.
Oh, was it pre-sold?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought it was a Sundance sale. I'm sorry about that.
No. Focus bought the film right before we went into production.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So we went in with the distributor. It was the first time I'd gone to a festival with the distributor.
Well, so we're getting into our spoilers. So folks, if you have not yet seen Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, please press pause, go see it. You could find it anywhere online that you would usually watch your movies, then come back and hear the rest of our conversation, because we're definitely getting into the spoilers. Openings are important for a movie. Mm-hmm. And here you chose something thematic that really sets a tone, in which she's, Autumn, our protagonist, is at a talent show at her school, and she is singing Power of Love with the lyrics of, he makes me do things I don't want to do. He makes me say things I don't want to say. And, you're getting right into it. How did you come up with that song choice and kind of this, bearing of her soul that you see in the opening?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good way to frame it. I really wanted a thematic opening, an opening scene can sort of tell you everything about what the film is going to explore. And I felt like it was exciting to like start on a performance, to not know whether the movie took place in the 50s or was contemporary, to establish so many things subtly in all those little performances. There are three guys in Letterman jackets, like singing about broken hearts and how so much of what you see in cinema explores the myth of romantic love, and then this girl gets up who's like been through some shit, and sings a song that's in conflict with the tone of the night. And is, in a way, like introducing herself as an outlier in this town, in this world. And I was just trying to like do that in a way that was fun and engaging and, colorful and, just...
It's a good start. It's a good start, but one of the things that you get into that we'll talk about in another minute or so is the threat of men that's throughout the movie, and she's heckled as she's singing, and like it's interesting because it wasn't just a student assembly, there were families there, and like it's like no one's like controlling their kid who's heckling her in the middle, but she picks it back up. She retains her composure, and I think it gets into another thing that I didn't expect is that this sense of mystery. In which in a movie like this, you don't expect there to actually be much of a mystery about who the father is. But that was something that you programmed really early, in which it could maybe be the heckler, but I had trouble seeing who the heckler was. She later dumps water over a high school kid's head in the restaurant afterwards. So it could be that guy. It could also be the bad stepdad. Is very threatening. And there's kind of a little bit of evidence for both. So when did you decide to actually keep it as a mystery as to who the father is?
From the beginning, I wanted to center the film around her journey and not detract from it, with the father. But I know that our brains are kind of conventionally wired to want to know who that was. So I was sort of playing with our expectations as audiences. But the truth is, the story I'm telling is about how alone women are in resolving these issues for themselves. In reality, our minds can make a conclusion and come up with resolve the mystery. It's not so complex,
Do you want to reveal it?
No, I didn't want to reveal it, but I was playing with showing the ways in which the world is hostile to women through all these male characters, and it could have been any of them.
Talk about some of the left turns, for people that have seen the movie, some of the early ideas that you had that never made it onto the screen, never made it into your production, but were maybe a direction that your script was going for a while that you were completely happy with that eventually evolved into something else.
There's one sequence that I cut from the edit, and everything else is relatively the same. There was one sequence before they go to New York where the two girls get on a bus and they go to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And she goes to a clinic, a real abortion clinic. And they tell her, you have to come back with your parents, or you could go see a judge.
Wow.
And from a story perspective, it didn't work. And from an execution perspective, it was troubled. And was it
trouble just because it's getting us off the journey that she's going on as like a sidestep that you didn't?
I streamlined the journey in the end. And that piece of information, plenty of people find out online anyway. Plenty of teenagers look online and find out that they need their parents' permission. And it felt like a false start to the journey. And then the execution aspects of it were difficult for other reasons.
What was the main reason it was difficult? Just shooting in a courtroom with a judge, that kind of thing?
No, I never went to the courtroom. It was just another clinic in Pennsylvania. I just, there's no rehearsal when you make a movie, and I'm a director. I'm not a magician. I can't like make amazing work without putting time into rehearsals.
Well, I was going to ask that later. So did you get any rehearsal time for this shoot?
I had a couple days to rehearse with Sydney and Talia.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Were there any major screenplay changes that came out of rehearsal? Because sometimes like an improv will give you an idea for a new scene or a way to rewrite something.
No, I think that's a lot of pressure to put on actors to improvise. I explained the script to them. I answered their questions, but I don't think I think there was one thing that changed like in the process. Originally, when she finds out she's pregnant in the script, she went and she dyed her hair. And Sydney's hair wasn't long enough and the wigs weren't going to work because it's so intimate. And then at the last minute, I saw that Sydney, had her nose pierced. And I said, that's it. That's perfect. We're going to like just swap out the hair dyeing for the nose piercing. And that was sort of a last minute idea that ended up being a more powerful choice.
In that sequence when she's also looking up things online, there's a moment where she sees, self-induced abortions and she starts taking a bunch of pills. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't see what the bottle said. Mm-hmm. What was she taking?
Vitamin C. People try.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, self-abort with vitamin C.
Why? Is that something that actually works, or is it an online myth? Or
online myth?
Okay, because I'd never heard that, and it's like I actually wrote down that it was vitamin C, but I'm like, nah, it can't be vitamin C.
It's vitamin C. If you can Google it and you'll find it.
Gotcha.
You can just type in "how do I give myself an herbal abortion" and you'll get that.
Huh? That's crazy. There's a lot of great moments in the movie, but I knew that we were going down a bad road when she goes to the homely clinic in her hometown. And, this is something that I thought was great that you put in your movie, because it's something that we're, for people that believe in the right to choose, we're trying to get out there more, that there's these clinics that trick people. Mm-hmm. And, the crisis pregnancy clinics, John Oliver on his show has talked about, even in the recent Borat movie, they went to one as well, the Borat subsequent movie film, the sequel. And so it was really great to see the way that you did it, because you broke it up into these scenes where they seem like allies and they seem like they really care about her. And then you just get this glimpse of this little documentary that they want to show her, and something's wrong. So at what point did you decide to keep that as a part of your narrative and put that in there? Because I thought it was just a great touch, because rather than you doing maybe a more typical filmmaker thing of painting these people as bad or making them clear antagonists, they actually seem like allies at first, the betrayer, which is the worst kind of antagonist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I wanted to do, because in my research and in my field work, and in excavating a landscape in small town Pennsylvania, those places are everywhere. And it's better to call them centers, because there's like nothing clinical about them. They have no doctors. They're layman people. Nothing that they own is like calibrated or licensed. And I went in and I talked to them. And I took a pregnancy test.
Wait, you talked to them like you pretended to be a patient?
Yeah. Yeah. I went undercover.
Okay.
Which is easy to do, because all you do is sign in and ask to take a pregnancy test. And I went through the counseling sessions. So it was easy for me to write those scenes, because I was writing them authentically and not projecting my opinions and my bias onto those people. And the truth is that they do think they're helping.
Right.
And they do think they are an ally to young women.
Look, the only positive thing you could say about them was they were encouraging adoption and wanted to help in that path, but that's not enough, because
I think that they are probably more evil than I represented them as.
You kind of gave them a nice look, because the thing that John Oliver pointed out the most in his expose on Last Week Tonight was that he had a phone call recorded in which they were explaining how they don't actually care what happens once the baby's born. They had the head of one of these centers explaining that they wouldn't even get a budget for diaper money to help young moms. So it was really just the abortion issue, don't have one. And then once you have a baby, it's your responsibility. We don't want to be involved in the least as an ally. And, you know, in your movie, what you did was they lied to her about her ultrasound. They told her she was, they told her she was around 10 or 11 weeks, 12 weeks. And it turns out when she goes just within half a week later, a few days later to a real clinic, they tell her she's 18 weeks. And so like they were lying to try and make it a procedure that she couldn't legally get, which was crazy.
They're trying to delay it. Yeah. The ones that I went to, they had, they're spaces where you donate baby clothes, equipment. So they do try and create a little community around the center. And they're filled with donations and diapers and strollers and high chairs and hand-me-downs.
Okay.
But
it's still not enough.
Yeah, I know. It's still not enough. That's what I was about to say. It's not enough.
So figuring out who she's going to go on her journey with, you gave her cousin as her ally. At what point did you decide that was going to be really just like a two-hander, the two of them on the road together?
I'll tell you, if I think back, I might have written a short one-page treatment of it where she went alone. And I was like, that doesn't work. It's too lonely. She couldn't do this by herself.
Sure.
So I decided to have like her take her cousin, make it appear, bring someone else in on the story and let them go on this odyssey together.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to tell you about Backstory Magazine. We recently published issue 42, and it would mean so much to me to have my podcast subscribers and listeners check us out. So as you know, you could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And if you've never read us, you could check out our free issue. And you could read screenplays in their entirety, accompanied by interviews with screenwriters. And something that we did that's really interesting in the new issue 42, is we have a section called Off the Shelf. And it's where writers of note go to share screenplays that they are still trying to get made and allow you to read them in their entirety and then talk to you about them via our interviews. And so in this issue, the two writers that we had were Simon Kinberg, the screenwriter of X-Men Days of Future Past, with his script Ghouls of New York about grave robbers in New York in the 1890s. True story, by the way. And it's a great script. It was the first script he sold. It's never been made. He still hopes maybe one day it will. It's not the top of his list, but it's a cool script. And he was really in depth about it. We also have Joe Carnahan's script, LA 58, and he wrote it with his brother, Matthew Michael Carnahan, and it's an amazing script, and, his interview was incredible as well. He's been trying to get it made for over 10 years. So what's interesting about that is he also provided us with storyboards and concept art that runs with the piece as well. So there is so much to discover in issue 42. I hope you go take a look at our table of contents over at backstory.net. There's so much great in issue 42. And if you want a discount, you could use code SAVE5. That will save you $5 off a subscription for 1 year and give you access to our archive, which is growing. It's not complete. It goes back to about issue 29 right now. And we're going to be adding new issues when we have a chance. But it just takes time because we're still publishing new content. But yeah, you save $5. That will save you $5 off a 1 year subscription. And look, it would mean everything to me to have my podcast listeners support my passion project. So thanks for considering subscribing. And folks, remember, we're also posting these interviews onto our YouTube page for Backstory Magazine. So you could watch these interviews that we're doing right now that you're also listening to as podcasts in iTunes and Spotify. So just keep that in mind as well. And speaking of those interviews, now we're going to get right back into our chat with writer-director Eliza Hittman about her latest film, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. You have subtlety to your work that I really appreciated because it made me a few times in the theater just do a double take. I'm like, wait, what was going on just now? You set up men as threats in the movie. And I forgot to bring this up a couple of minutes ago, but in the grocery store, just when they're counting out the money at the end of the day and they're slipping it through the wall and you can't even see who's on the other side of the wall taking the money, someone's grabbing their hand and kissing it. And you learn later it's the manager, and just you did such a nice, subtle, kind of realistic job of showing that. Where did even the idea of money through a wall, a faceless person grabbing your hand and kissing it come from? Because it's just one of those creep moments that you said so much by doing so little.
It comes from real life. My partner, Scott, actually, who's the editor of the movie, he's my reference for small town America. He's from a really small, like Rust Belt town in Western New York. And he worked at the supermarket. And someone used to kiss his hand as he put the money through the slot. So wow. I stole his memory and put it in the context of the film.
That's great. I mean, well, look, you also show other threats at the grocery store. There's the guy in line, and we just see, her cousin asks an innocuous question. She says, "Oh, it looks like you're throwing a party." And then this creepy guy is like pressuring her, "Oh, come to the party. Like you asked about it." Like that's creepy. The manager is creepy as well at the store. But it's interesting because you then introduce on the bus the character of Jasper, and I don't know where to place him because you left it ambiguous enough that he's not a direct threat. He's not a physical threat. He comes to them, he gives his number because he's picking up on them. I'm surprised she didn't just, fake throw it away or block him, because he becomes an ally a little later in the movie when they need money. She
feels like she has to be nice because women are taught that they have to be nice.
I feel like there should be like a fake system that, like, when women are approached with creepy guys like that could auto send a text to them and like never give their number. I think that would be like a good app or something like that. But interestingly, he appears later and he does offer them food when they don't want to go to the party with them, but they don't eat, interestingly. And we know that they're hungry. We see their money dwindling.
They have pride.
Is that it? Because I was going to ask, like, because it is interesting because they definitely are hungry. Just didn't want to receive the money at that point.
Well, they just have pride, and they just don't want to like kind of admit that they're desperate in this moment.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because when he does finally give them money, it's not completely altruistic, you could argue, because there is a transactional element to it, which he's definitely still picking up on her cousin. And tell me your cousin's name again, because I keep saying her cousin.
Skylar. It doesn't matter. Cousin is fine. They don't really have names.
So he keeps picking up on Skylar, and then he is like, he separates them right when they go to the ATM, and I think he sees it as his moment to divide and conquer. And he's kissing her. She finds him on the street, and he's kissing her, but he's not forcing himself on her, but you could easily argue that he's not taking the cues that this girl is not like in the mood for a date on this particular night. And you just get this, again, small moment of Autumn on the other side of the pillar holding Skylar's hand, while she's kissing, is kind of like a thank you for like going this extra step to help get us the money to get home and stuff like that. When did that idea came about? Because it was another one of your just really good small moments that has a big impact.
I think as a writer, you try and write like all the kind of conventional scenes that you think need to be in the story. And I have a feeling when I'm writing, when they're unsuccessful, when they deviate from the style or the sort of logic of the film, like in a conventional, in the conventional version of this movie, these two girls after this, exchange would say something like, "I won't tell anybody that you got an abortion in New York if you won't tell anybody that I made out with that guy for bus money." Like, I wanted a moment of like solidarity, sisterhood, where they acknowledge and support each other and agree that they'll never speak of this again.
It was a great moment.
But if I can't write that scene as dialogue. It doesn't feel authentic to me. It doesn't feel right. But sometimes I try and then I say, wrong movie. And how can I find another way to communicate what's unspoken what I want to leave unspoken, but visible or palpable in this moment.
Well, I think you really nailed it, because that's what you did, in which you took an idea that you just admitted you realized was wandering into the territories of a cliche. You decided that you liked the moment, and then you recalibrated to make it something that was original, which, you did. So kudos to you on that. Coming back, for setup payoff, and I'm not sure that this was a setup payoff. I couldn't help but notice it. There is another singing moment. They go to karaoke. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's just my ineptitude, but I couldn't clock the significance of the second song that Autumn sings in the movie. Mm-hmm. What was it? I was going to try and look it up, but I didn't have time.
Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Okay.
I guess originally, I was trying to sort of set up this motif that, this town is stuck in the 50s. All the music that's playing in the supermarket is from the 50s, okay. Which happens, we had this president who's trying to overtly dial the clock back to this, image of a great America, which of course is a horrible America, which we're trying to, and the song she picks is from that era. And it's Don't Let the Sun Catch You Crying. And it speaks to the moment, of, having to hide, the expectation of having to hide your pain. But I didn't let it become cathartic.
Okay. It was an interesting moment. So I was just curious of the significance. Also, it was interesting in that same scene at the end of that scene, she does call her mom in the bathroom. Mm-hmm. And doesn't really say much, but she does identify herself. And obviously the mom has caller IDs. She knows who's calling. I was surprised that the mom never calls her back. Mm-hmm. There wasn't that, her phone is ringing off the hook. She has to block her mom or something that weekend. Her mom, it would also provide a tear in the story that her and Skylar had told their mothers about spending the night at each other's houses, because she's actually, by not talking to her mom now, really
there is that moment. There is a really small moment. It's fine if you missed it, where they do text their moms.
Oh, okay. Where? At the bus station?
It's in the bus station.
Okay.
I'll be at Skylar's. I'll be at Autumn's.
But that's earlier, isn't it? That's before she calls her.
I don't remember exactly, but I think I just wanted a moment of her being utterly vulnerable, while she's going through this 2-day procedure. They're in some bowling alley. She's bleeding and she calls her mom for support, but then just can't tell her.
What do you think about her mom as a character? Because the way it plays here, it seems like she's remarried. It seems like that guy's a stepdad. He's not a good guy. He's
not a good guy.
He's not being nice to really anyone in the house and is seeming like a threat. Mm-hmm. But her mom seems like she's kind of, I think busy would be the way that I would put it, because there was also
overtaxed. Yeah. Raising these other kids, has them, that the stepfather is a big baby in the house also.
Right.
And maybe there's not room, that this young this teenager is displaced in a way from her own home with this new family. I don't think she's a bad mother. I don't think she's a Christian mother. I think that probably the expectation would have been for Autumn to have the baby. She's a young mother.
You think if the mom found out, she would have pushed Autumn to have the baby?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
I think that there's a sense of not wanting to repeat history.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. There's a lot of, were there ever more scenes with her and her mom?
No, there's one more scene. There's one scene that got cut where Autumn visits her at work, but you don't learn anything new.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a moment.
So a good scene to cut. All right. Well, so getting to one of our biggest scenes in the movie, and it sucks that we're all in a pandemic, so not a lot of people got to see this in theaters, but I could tell you people were openly weeping around me during the never, rarely, sometimes, always questionnaire scene. At what point did you learn about that questionnaire and decide to make it the title of the movie? And tell us about writing that scene.
Well, it was probably at some point where I experienced, writer's block, which wasn't really writer's block, where it was just me kind of getting stuck and wanting new inspiration, and I called someone at Planned Parenthood, a social worker, and I said, just take me through one more time the process of dealing with minors. What would you be concerned about? How would you decide if and when to call Child Protective Services? And they sent me over all of the paperwork to look at. And they took me through each section. And when the person I was on the phone with got to the section of the questionnaire that's called intimate partner violence, she explained it to me, like, this is the part of the intake where we want to try and evaluate if somebody is being hurt. And she read the questions, and I heard never, rarely, sometimes, always being repeated in a way that was lyrical and poetic and rhythmic and unforgettable. And the questions are so powerful. And I guess maybe as I was writing, I was toying with, am I going to reveal, who the father is? No, am I, what am I looking for dramaturgically to answer some of the dramatic questions around, her pregnancy, her life, her experience? And that section of the questionnaire, was the answer, the key to sort of what I was looking for as I was writing. I don't remember where it was in the scope of the months that I was writing, but being able to go back and ask more questions, was part of my journey as a writer. And then I'll say, like, I spent time with a real social worker in the room and in person when we used to be able to meet with people in person.
Right.
And I wanted to cast her. And I basically sat with her and tried to marry what she does as a professional in the room with the style of the script. And it was a really rewarding collaboration.
Did you cast her?
Yeah.
Oh man,
yeah. Uh-huh.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I felt an authenticity from her that was great. But so tell us about shooting that scene, because your coverage, I'm guessing you were shooting with one camera for most of the movie. Is that right?
If it was TV, they would have wanted me to use every shot.
I know. But was this movie in general a one camera shoot?
No, occasionally we shot 16 millimeter. We had a second camera body. Occasionally we used it. Okay. Here we used it.
Okay.
There was one lockdown frontal and one like 3/4.
Because I mean, like, this is a scene where the power really comes from almost never leaving Autumn's face. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious how much rehearsal there was, how many takes you did, if you had emotional cues of like, this would be the moment that maybe you cry, or something like that. Or did you just let it rip?
I let it go. I thought about like when we would shoot it, like it couldn't have been the first week, it had to be the last week. I rehearsed the social worker. We went through it back and forth. I timed it to be a length of film, the length of a can of film.
Which is it still 3 minutes?
No, it's 12 minutes. But there's 16. There's cutaways in the beginning. Because I wanted to establish the social worker and the context and the room.
And you knew the scene itself would be 12 minutes though too.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I took Sydney aside that day that we were going to shoot the scene, and I kind of quarantined her away from the production. So she had a lot of time to look through the scene before we shot. And I went in and I read it with her. And I told her, because she was nervous about how long it was, I said, don't worry about the character's answers at the beginning of the scene. Just answer as yourself, like all of the personal medical questions, like just answer as yourself. Like, have you gotten a vaccine? Do you wear a seatbelt? Do you smoke? And she started the scene from a very honest place. And then it went much deeper. And the take that's in the film is the first take.
Wow.
We did it. And when we were done, she said, it was cathartic and I can't do it again. And we did do it again, and it's different. It's more stoic, but we used the first take.
More stoic, like she's just emotionally kind of like dead, turned off a bit.
A little tapped out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I thought it was great. And the questions, like, again, the questions, I guess, are part of the real test, I would think, but it is.
It's straight from the Planned Parenthood forum.
But it's going back into that mystery.
I wrote it.
It's going back into that mystery, because it's like, are you threatened at home? And she's, that's what gives her pause. Is there a health hazard at home? That question. So it's like, again, when you're trying to guess who the father might be, and that threat at home, like those are threaded in there as well, but it could mean other things. What was your most difficult challenge in editing? Because editing is the last stage of storytelling. It's where you see how your story's going. What was something that kind of surprised you maybe in the editing room that you hadn't expected in the screenplay stage?
I don't know. The edit is a moment to confront the shoot. And that's hard. And I'm really hard on myself. I have a lot of woulda, coulda, shoulda. Did I fuck this up? Did I is the movie going to be successful? And I have, a really good editor who I trust immensely, and we get through it. I don't know. It's hard to sort of pinpoint one thing. I did go back and do subtle reshoots.
Tell us about that. There's always an interesting lesson there.
Well, just like you're saying, that what's good about like the crisis center is that, that they're not evil, right? Like one example is I felt that a performance that I had gotten had maybe tripped over that line. And it wasn't the fault of the actor. It's the fault of the process, because I didn't get to work with that actor. But I knew it was really important to go back and bring it back to my side of the line.
That's great. Were there other reshoots that you want to tell us about?
There was one really small reshoot. I mean, where after Autumn finds out she's farther along than she thought, they come out of the clinic and it's night. That was an exterior that I shot in the summer, because I thought it was important for the timeline of the film to show a transition to night, that they were kind of like up a tree. Originally, it just cut to them on the train. And I was like, no, we need something that just says, okay, now they're alone in the city at night.
Yeah, right. Because they're interior the whole time. There weren't windows. So you actually don't know what time of day it is. No. That's smart.
Yeah. So like little things like that to finesse the cut were important.
What do you think happens when she gets home? Do you think her journey's discovered? Do you think her mom is nosy, or do you think like this is just a chapter in her life that she got away with?
Yeah, the real question is what do you think?
How did I know you were going to say that? Okay, big last question for you. What was your toughest scene as a writer and a director? What was your toughest scene on the page? The scene you were probably sweating and came back to over and over again. And how did you creatively rise to the challenge? Then logistically on set, what was your toughest scene as a director?
On set, like scenes with more people where I didn't get to prepare in a way that I think you should be able to prepare. I felt very unprepared in places like the high school, like the numbers, like some of like the family scene in the restaurant. Like I couldn't shoot the whole script. I couldn't shoot everything that happens in Pennsylvania because for the tax incentive, a certain number of days had to be in New York. So I was cheating, and that's not something I like to do. So I was very self-conscious and worried that the scenes we were cheating for Pennsylvania and New York were never going to feel authentic.
But wasn't it just interiors? Like it was.
Yeah, but still, my um, philosophy as a director is to, go for the real thing.
Ground it in verite. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then so on the page, what was your toughest scene on the page? Like something that was kind of tripping you up in the script for a while and maybe took you a while to solve before the light bulb clicked on.
I think maybe I struggled to sort of fully articulate Skylar's arc throughout the film. And that was something I had to go back and work on. And it's interesting because while I was casting and I was initially doing this wide search, no like kind of known actors wanted to read for Skylar. Like I thought I would just audition for both roles and look at girls for both, but like all kind of kids in the industry were like autumn or bust.
That's fascinating because it's basically telling you that, I guess the way you interpret it, which is probably correct, you could do more to flesh out her character as a more three-dimensional character.
Yeah.
So what were some of the things you did to do that?
I had to sort of like carve out her interior world more. It wasn't like I needed to go back and write more scenes, but clarify what she was thinking and feeling throughout the script so that people would be excited and able to visualize and say her journey, is about being a support for her cousin and in whatever way she can, trying to, to help her on this journey, knowing that there's a wall, knowing that she's private and guarded, and also willing to sacrifice herself to get them home.
Yeah, I mean, like you do it again, like to your credit, you do it sometimes without words. They kind of have that argument in the bus station.
Yeah.
And then like they reconcile just by silently doing makeup together in the bathroom.
Yeah, there's a subtlety to it, but maybe it was too subtle on the page.
Could you give us an example if one comes to mind of something that you did to attract actors like on the page? Like did you write more about what was going on internally for Sky?
Yeah, a little bit more. I wrote her point of view into everything. Like Skylar looked like in the restaurant scene, Skylar looks at her cousin, something's wrong. Skylar does this. Skylar does this. I made her more visible.
Interesting. Same. Was it the same with the kissing scene, which is a big moment for Skylar as well?
That was always there, but it didn't. But she needed to be more defined on the page throughout the script to arrive at that moment. It was in my head. It wasn't as like glaring on the page.
Got it. Okay. Well, cool. What's next? What can you tell us about that's next?
Oh, I have to finish a script, and my goal is to get through this script this weekend and send it in on Monday because I've been holding it back for a while, and it's time that my producers read it.
Are you able to say what it's called?
Talk about it. No, it's
okay.
Every time I do that, I regret it.
All right, no regrets here. No regrets here. Well, I guess the last question I have for you is I give money every year to Planned Parenthood. Are there any other charities that you want to call out in case any of our listeners or watchers on YouTube want to give money?
There's actually an organization that gives, they don't take money, abortion funds. They're travel funds for women who don't have the resources to get to where they're going.
Okay. Because I mean, that was a great thing that you saw was those extra resources. Like they were even told that they could stay at a place overnight.
That's the real place. That's called Haven Coalition, but they don't take donations. It's just volunteers.
Wow. That's great. Well, look, you've been very generous with your time. I thank you so much. I really loved your film. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you. It was so nice chatting.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to writer-director Eliza Hittman for being so generous with her time and talking about her latest film, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. And folks, if you haven't seen it yet, I really hope you search it out online and see it as soon as you can, because it's such a great film. And there's so many different layers to it that we talked about today. And while you're surfing around online, I also hope you read Backstory Magazine. You could read us on a desktop or laptop over at backstory.net or through our iPad app, Backstory. I also hope you'll check out the table of contents, because there are so many cool things in this latest issue 42. But if you've never read us before, you could read the free issue over at backstory.net. And I think you'll really dig it. I think it'll make you want to become a subscriber. And if you do want to become a subscriber, you could use coupon code SAVE5. That will save you $5 off a subscription, get you access to anything new we publish and to our archive, which goes back to about issue 29 at the moment. And we're also adding older issues into it as well. So look, it would mean everything to me to have my podcast listeners support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2021. All rights reserved. If you want to reach out to me, you could always find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter, or Backstory_mag is the account I run for Backstory on Twitter as well. And, Yo Goldsmith and Backstory_mag are also the handles for our Instagram accounts. So you can find us there. And, I have a Facebook fan page. I'm not always on it. You could always email me, yogoldsmith@gmail.com. I promise to not respond immediately. That is the one promise I will make when you email me, but I'll try and get back to you at some point. So look, I'm a pretty easy guy to track down. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.